Actions have consequences.
The notification on Melissa's phone lit up the dark garage like a neon sign advertising my stupidity. I was under our old Chevy, wrench in hand, when her iPhone buzzed on the workbench above me. The screen showed a hotel confirmation for 2 guests at the Pineview Motel. Room 237, tomorrow night. I'd been married to Mel for 23 years. 23 years of her telling me where she was going, who she was with, what time she'd be home. But lately, those details had gotten fuzzy, vague, like looking through frosted glass. "Jack, I'm heading out with the girls," she'd called from upstairs 30 minutes ago. "Don't wait up." The girls? Right. I slid out from under the car, my back protesting against the concrete floor. At 48, my body reminded me daily that my boxing days were long behind me. These days, I fixed cars instead of faces, ran Galloway Auto Repair instead of running my mouth in the ring. But some instincts never fade. I picked up Mel's phone, my greasy fingers leaving smudges on the pristine screen. The confirmation email was from someone with the initials TW, the same TW who'd been texting my wife increasingly frequently over the past 2 months. Trent Wallace. I knew the name from Mel's work stories. Hotshot account manager at Preston & Associates, the advertising agency where my wife had climbed from receptionist to creative director over the past 15 years. Drove a red Tesla, wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and had the kind of confidence that comes from never having your nose broken. I scrolled through their text thread, my jaw tightening with each message. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow night. Room 237, just like we planned. Bring that black dress I love. Tell Jack you're with Sandy again. He never questions that." Sandy, Melissa's supposed best friend, the realtor who'd sold us this house 12 years ago, the woman who'd been covering for my wife's affair, apparently. My phone buzzed. Mel, texting from wherever she actually was. "Working late on the Henderson campaign. Home around midnight. Love you." I stared at the message, then at the hotel confirmation on her phone. The Pineview Motel was 40 minutes outside Frostbite, Wisconsin, our little lake town that had seen better decades. It was the kind of place you went when you didn't want to be seen, when you had secrets to keep. I set her phone back on the workbench exactly where she'd left it, then walked to the kitchen window. Our house sat on a hill overlooking Lake Winnebago, and tonight the water looked black as oil under the cloudy sky. The weather forecast called for the coldest February on record. The lake would freeze solid within days. Funny how some things crystallize when the temperature drops. I grabbed a beer from the fridge and settled into my recliner, the one Mel always complained about. "That ugly thing doesn't match anything in this room, Jack." But it was comfortable, and after 12 hours of crawling under cars and dealing with customers who thought a squeaky brake meant their transmission was shot, comfort mattered more than aesthetics. The house felt different now. Every family photo on the mantle looked like a lie. Every shared memory felt contaminated. I thought about our daughter Erin, 21, and in her senior year at UW-Madison. What would this do to her? Would she blame me for not being enough to keep her mother interested? I finished the beer and opened another, then another. By the time Melissa's headlights swept across the living room window at 12:47 a.m., I'd made a decision. She came through the front door quietly, probably thinking I was asleep. I heard her heels click across the hardwood floor, heard her pause at the bottom of the stairs. "Jack, you awake? In here," I called. She appeared in the doorway, still wearing her work clothes. Black dress, the one Trent loved according to his text. Her makeup was perfect, not a hair out of place. She didn't look like someone who'd been hunched over campaign layouts for 6 hours. "How was work?" I asked. "Exhausting. The Henderson people are impossible to please." She kicked off her heels and rubbed her feet. "I'm going to shower and head to bed." "Sandy called earlier," I lied smoothly. "Said she had a great time with you girls tonight." Melissa's face didn't change, but I caught the slight pause before she answered. "Oh yeah, we just grabbed dinner at that new place downtown. Nothing exciting." "Which new place?" The Italian place. You know, with the outdoor seating. There was no new Italian place in Frostbite. The only restaurant that had opened recently was a Subway, and it definitely didn't have outdoor seating in February in Wisconsin. "Sounds nice," I said. "Maybe we should check it out sometime." "Sure, maybe." She was already heading for the stairs. "I'm beat. See you in the morning." I listened to her footsteps on the stairs, heard the bathroom door close, heard the shower start. Then I walked back to the garage and looked at her phone again. A new message from TW had arrived 20 minutes ago. Thanks for tonight. Tomorrow will be even better. Can't wait to have you all to myself. I took a photo of the message with my own phone, then deleted it from hers. Trent Wallace wanted to play games? Fine, but he was about to learn that some games have consequences. The next morning, Melissa left for work at her usual time, 7:30 a.m. sharp. She kissed my cheek like she had every morning for over 2 decades, told me she'd be late again tonight. Big presentation tomorrow, she said, adjusting her scarf in the hallway mirror. I might not be home until after 10. I nodded and sipped my coffee, watching her through the kitchen window as she backed her silver Lexus out of the driveway. The car had been her 40th birthday present to herself, financed with her agency bonus. At the time, I'd been proud of her success. Now I wondered how much of that bonus money had gone toward hotel rooms and gifts for Trent. My first appointment wasn't until 9, so I had time to think, to plan. I'd spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, running scenarios through my head. The old Jack, the boxer, would have driven straight to Trent's apartment and settled this with his fists. But I wasn't 25 anymore, and assault charges wouldn't solve anything. No, this required strategy, patience. The kind of careful planning that had made me successful in the auto repair business, where one wrong move could destroy an engine worth more than most people's annual salary. At 8:30, I drove to Ben's boxing gym on the outskirts of town. Ben Kowalski had been my trainer back in the day, when I'd had dreams of going pro. Those dreams had died when I met Melissa and decided that a steady income mattered more than glory. But Ben and I had stayed friends, and his gym had become my refuge whenever life got complicated. I found him in his office, a cramped room above the main floor that smelled like coffee and liniment. Ben was 62 now, his hair white as fresh snow, but his shoulders still filled out his frostbite boxing t-shirt like he could step into the ring tomorrow. You look like heck, he said when I walked in. Feel worse. I dropped into the folding chair across from his desk. Got a problem, Ben? The kind that requires legal advice or the kind that requires bail money? Neither. Yet. I told him about Melissa and Trent, about the hotel reservation and the lies. Ben listened without interruption, his weathered face growing darker with each detail. So, what are you going to do? He asked when I finished. I don't know. Part of me wants to drive over to that motel tonight and drag him out by his throat. And the other part? Wants to be smarter about it. Ben leaned back in his chair, studying me. You remember what I used to tell you about fighting angry? Angry fighters make mistakes. That's right. They telegraph their punches, leave themselves open, go for the knockout when they should be working the body. He stood up and walked to the window overlooking the gym floor. Your wife and this Trent character, they think they're winning. They think you're some dumb mechanic who doesn't pay attention to what's going on in his own house. Maybe they're right. Bees, Ben turned back to me. You spotted this whole thing, didn't you? You found the evidence, figured out their game. That's not dumb, Jack. That's smart. Now you need to decide what kind of fight this is going to be. I thought about that as I drove to the shop. My business, Galloway Auto Repair, occupied a converted gas station on the main drag through Frostbite. It wasn't much to look at from the outside. But I'd built a solid reputation over the years. Honest work, fair prices, no BS. The kind of values that seemed increasingly rare in a world full of people like Trent Wallace. My first customer was Mrs. Henderson, whose ancient Buick had been making grinding noises for weeks before she'd finally brought it in. The brake pads were completely shot, and the rotors needed resurfacing. A $400 repair that could have been a $100 fix if she'd listened to the warning signs earlier. Why didn't you come in when you first heard the noise? I asked as I wrote up the estimate. I kept hoping it would go away on its own, she said. Sometimes problems fix themselves if you ignore them long enough. I thought about that conversation all morning. Some problems did go away if you ignored them, but others just got worse, more expensive, more dangerous. The trick was knowing which was which. At lunch, I drove past Preston and Associates. The agency occupied a sleek glass building in the newer part of town, where the city council had spent millions trying to attract businesses and young professionals. Melissa's Lexus was parked in her reserved spot near the front entrance. Next to it sat a red Tesla Model S with vanity plates that read, Trent 1. Subtle. I parked across the street and waited. At 12:15, Melissa and Trent emerged from the building together. They walked to his car, and I watched him open the passenger door for her. A gentleman. How thoughtful. They drove to Chez Laurent, the fanciest restaurant in Frostbite, the kind of place where entrees started at $30 and the waiters wore ties. I followed at a distance and parked where I could see them through the front window. They sat at a corner table, leaning close together like teenagers on a first date. Melissa laughed at something Trent said, touching his hand across the table. She looked happy, relaxed, more animated than she'd been at home in months. I sat in my truck watching my wife fall in love with another man and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. It wasn't anger exactly, it was something deeper, more permanent. My phone buzzed, a text from Melissa. Grabbed lunch with some colleagues to discuss the Henderson campaign. Back to the office soon. Colleagues, plural. I looked through the restaurant window again. Just the two of them, sharing what looked like a very intimate conversation. I drove back to the shop and spent the afternoon working on Mrs. Henderson's Buick, channeling my frustration into honest labor. By 5 o'clock, I'd finished the brake job and started on an oil change for Tom Bradley's pickup truck. Tom owned the hardware store downtown and had been bringing his vehicles to me for 8 years. "You seem distracted today," Tom said as I drained the old oil. "Just got a lot on my mind." "Anything I can help with?" I almost told him. Tom was a good man, the kind of friend who'd listen without judgment and offer practical advice. But this wasn't his problem, it was mine. "Thanks, but I've got it handled." At 6:30, I closed the shop and drove home. Melissa's car wasn't in the driveway, which wasn't surprising. She'd said she'd be late tonight. Very late, according to the hotel reservation I'd seen. I showered, made myself a sandwich, and settled in to wait. At 7:15, Melissa called. "Hey, honey, I'm going to be really late tonight. This presentation is kicking my behind." "How late?" "Probably not until after midnight. Don't wait up." "Okay, love you. Love you too." The line went dead, and I stared at the phone for a long moment. She'd said love you the same way she'd been saying it for years, automatic and reflexive, like saying bless you after someone sneezes. At 8 o'clock, I got in my truck and drove toward the Pineview Motel. The Pineview Motel looked exactly like what it was, a place where people went to do things they couldn't do at home. 2 stories of faded brown siding, a neon sign with half the letters burned out, and a parking lot full of potholes that hadn't been fixed since the Clinton administration. I parked behind a dumpster where I had a clear view of the office and most of the rooms. At 8:47, Trent's red Tesla pulled into the lot. He parked directly in front of room 237, got out, and looked around nervously before walking to the office. 5 minutes later, he emerged with a key card and let himself into the room. The lights came on and I saw his silhouette moving around inside, probably setting the scene for his romantic evening with my wife. Melissa arrived at 9:23. She parked her Lexus 3 spaces away from Trent's car and walked quickly to room 237, her heels clicking on the cracked asphalt. She didn't knock. The door opened before she reached it, and Trent pulled her inside. The lights went out. I sat in my truck for an hour, staring at that dark window, imagining what was happening behind it. My wife of 23 years, the mother of my daughter, the woman I'd built a life with, was in that room with another man, doing things with him that she used to do with me. The rational part of my brain told me to leave. I'd confirmed what I already knew. Melissa was cheating, and now I had proof. I could file for divorce, split our assets, and move on with my life, clean and simple. But the other part of my brain, the part that remembered what it felt like to hit someone so hard they forgot their own name, wanted something else entirely. I got out of my truck and walked across the parking lot to Trent's Tesla. The car was beautiful, I had to admit. Pristine red paint that probably cost more to touch up than most people spent on an entire paint job. Custom rims that gleamed under the motel's flickering lights. Leather interior that had never seen a coffee stain or cigarette burn. I pulled out my pocket knife and walked slowly around the car, dragging the blade along the paint. It made a satisfying scraping sound as it carved through the clear coat and into the metal beneath. I wrote cheater across the driver's side door, then moved to the passenger side and added liar for good measure. The tires were next. 4 quick punctures, 1 in each sidewall. The Tesla settled onto its rims with a series of soft sighs, like a dying animal. For my final touch, I walked to the dumpster and retrieved a bag of rotting fish that someone had thrown away. The smell was incredible, a combination of decay and desperation that seemed appropriate for the occasion. I used my knife to pop the Tesla's trunk and dumped the entire bag inside, making sure to spread it around for maximum effect. Then I walked back to my truck and drove home. Melissa didn't get home until 1:30 a.m. I pretended to be asleep when she slipped into bed, but I could smell Trent's cologne on her skin. She'd showered at the motel, but some scents linger longer than others. The next morning, she was quiet over breakfast, distracted. Her phone kept buzzing, and each time it did, her frown deepened. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just work stuff. The Henderson presentation didn't go as well as we hoped." "That's too bad. Maybe next time." She looked at me sharply, as if trying to determine whether there was a hidden meaning in my words. But I kept my expression neutral, interested, but not overly concerned. At 7:45, 15 minutes after she'd left for work, my phone rang. It was Melissa, and she sounded upset. "Jack, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Okay. Did you do something to Trent's car last night?" I let the silence stretch for a few seconds, as if I was confused by the question. "What kind of something?" "Someone vandalized it, slashed the tires, keyed the paint, put something disgusting in the trunk. The police are involved." "Jesus, that's awful. Why would you think I had anything to do with it?" "Because..." She paused, and I could almost hear her trying to figure out how to explain her suspicion without revealing why she knew about Trent's car in the first place. "Because you've seemed different lately. Distant. I've been working a lot. Business is good right now." I paused. "Where did this happen?" "Maybe I heard something about it." Another pause. Longer this time. "At his apartment complex." Interesting. She was lying about where the car had been vandalized, which meant she couldn't tell the police the truth either. Hard to file an accurate report when you can't explain what your car was doing at a no-tell motel. "Well, I hope they catch whoever did it," I said. "Sounds like some real sicko." "Yeah, me too." After she hung up, I allowed myself a small smile, round one to me. But this was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a student of my wife's deception. I tracked her movements, cataloged her lies, and built a comprehensive picture of her affair with Trent Wallace. They met twice a week, always at different motels outside of town. They texted constantly, using a combination of work-related code words and barely disguised innuendo. And they were getting careless. The vandalism of Trent's car had spooked them initially, but not enough to end their relationship. If anything, it seemed to have added an element of danger that they found exciting. Melissa started staying out later, taking longer lunch breaks and making less effort to hide her tracks. She also started treating me differently at home, more distant, less patient, quicker to find fault with everything I did. The coffee was too strong. The television was too loud. My work clothes smelled like motor oil. It was as if she was building a case for why our marriage was failing, justifying her affair by cataloging my shortcomings. "We never talk anymore," she said one evening over dinner. "We're talking now." "No, we're not. We're just sitting in the same room, eating food, making noise with our mouths. That's not talking." I set down my fork and looked at her. Really looked at her. She was still beautiful at 45, her blonde hair styled in the kind of expensive cut that required monthly maintenance, her figure maintained through twice-weekly sessions with a personal trainer. But there was something hard in her eyes now, something calculating. "What would you like to talk about?" I asked. "I don't know. Your dreams, your goals, what you want out of life. When was the last time we talked about the future?" "What future did you have in mind?" She shrugged. "Maybe we should take a vacation, get away from frostbite for a while, see the world." "Where would you like to go?" Trent was telling me about this amazing resort in Costa Rica. Very exclusive, very romantic. The name slipped out so casually that I almost missed it. Almost. "Trent?" Her face flushed slightly. "From work. He went there with his girlfriend last year." Trent didn't have a girlfriend. I'd done my research. He'd been divorced for 3 years and lived alone in a downtown condo that cost more per month than most people's mortgages. "Sounds expensive," I said. "We could afford it. My bonus this year was pretty good." Her bonus. The money she'd been using to fund her affair. Hotel rooms, expensive dinners, gifts for her lover, all paid for with money she'd earned while lying to my face. "Maybe we should talk to a financial advisor first," I suggested. "Make sure we're being smart with our money." "Why? Don't you trust me to manage our finances?" The question hung in the air between us like smoke. "Don't you trust me?" From a woman who'd been systematically deceiving me for months. Of course I trust you, I said. I just think it's important to plan these things carefully. She nodded, but I could see the frustration in her eyes. She wanted me to be enthusiastic about her vacation idea, to play along with her fantasy, but I wasn't going to make this easy for her. That night, after she'd gone to bed, I sat in my garage and made a list of everything I knew about Trent Wallace. His address, his schedule, his habits, his weaknesses. The man was a creature of routine, which made him predictable, and predictable people were easy to manipulate. He worked out at Fitzone every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 a.m. He ate lunch at the same 3 restaurants on a rotating schedule. He drove the same route to work every day, stopping at the same Starbucks for the same overpriced coffee drink. More importantly, he was insecure. The flashy car, the expensive clothes, the carefully cultivated image of success, it all screamed of someone trying too hard to prove something. And insecure people made mistakes when they felt threatened. I decided it was time to make Trent Wallace feel very threatened indeed. On Thursday morning, I followed him to Fitzone. I waited until he'd gone inside, then walked over to his new Tesla. He'd replaced the vandalized one with an identical model, and slipped a note under the windshield wiper. I know what you're doing with Melissa. Stop! Or everyone else will know too. No signature, no demands, no threats of violence. Just a simple statement of fact and a clear consequence. I watched from across the street as he discovered the note an hour later. His face went pale as he read it, and his head swiveled around the parking lot like he expected to see someone watching him, which, of course, he did. He stood there for a full minute, reading and rereading the note, before crumpling it up and throwing it in a nearby trash can. But I could see his hands shaking as he got in his car. That afternoon, I left another note on his car at the office. This one was more specific. Room 237 at the Pine View, room 156 at the Lakeside Inn, room 22 at the Sunset Motel. Should I keep going? The next morning, I found him waiting by my truck when I arrived at the shop. Trent Wallace was everything I'd expected and nothing I'd feared. About 6 feet tall, lean but not muscular, with the kind of artificial tan that came from expensive salons rather than honest work. His suit probably cost more than I made in a week, and his shoes were polished to a mirror shine. But his eyes were nervous, darting around like a trapped animal looking for an escape route. We need to talk, he said. About what? You know what? I unlocked the shop door and walked inside, forcing him to follow me. The familiar smells of motor oil and metal surrounded us, and I felt more confident on my home turf. I'm not sure I do, I said, pulling on my work coveralls. You'll have to be more specific. The notes, the threats. What notes? He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo of the second note. These notes. I examined the image carefully, as if seeing it for the first time. Huh, that's weird. Someone's been following you around? Don't play dumb with me, Jack. We both know what this is about. Do we? He stepped closer, trying to use his height advantage to intimidate me. But I'd been intimidated by much scarier men than Trent Wallace, and most of them had ended up on their backs. I want you to stop, he said. Whatever you think you know, whatever you think is happening, you're wrong. Am I? Yes. I walked over to my toolbox and selected a large wrench, hefting it in my hand like I was testing its weight. Trent's eyes followed the movement, and I saw him swallow hard. You know what I do for a living, Trent. You fix cars. That's right, I fix things that are broken. And you know what I've learned in 20 years of fixing things? He didn't answer. Most problems are caused by people who don't know what they're doing, trying to fix things they don't understand. They make a small problem worse by ignoring it, or by using the wrong tools, or by being careless. I set the wrench down on the workbench with a loud clang that made him jump. The smart thing to do when you've got a problem is to stop making it worse. Step back, assess the situation, and figure out the right way to handle it before you cause permanent damage. What are you saying? I'm saying you've got a problem, Trent, and the smart thing to do would be to stop making it worse. He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he couldn't quite spit out. Finally, he turned and walked toward the door. This isn't over, he said. No, I agreed. It's not. But I was just getting started. 3 days after my conversation with Trent, Melissa came home with news that shouldn't have surprised me, but somehow did. I'm going to Chicago this weekend, she announced over dinner. Work conference? Which conference? The Midwest Advertising Summit. It's a big networking event, lots of potential new clients. I nodded and took another bite of the lasagna she'd picked up from Giovanni's on her way home. Even her cooking had become outsourced lately. Will Trent be going too? She paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. Probably. Most of the senior staff will be there. Sounds like fun. It's work, Jack. Not fun. But the way she said it, the slight smile that played at the corners of her mouth, told a different story. She was excited about this trip. Excited about spending a weekend with Trent, away from frostbite and the need for secrecy. What hotel are you staying at? The Palmer House? Why? Just curious. Maybe I'll call you Saturday night, see how the conference is going. The smile disappeared. I'll probably be in sessions or networking events most of the time. You might not be able to reach me. I'll leave a message. After dinner, while Melissa packed for her conference, I did some research. The Midwest Advertising Summit was a real event, and it was indeed being held at the Palmer House in Chicago that weekend. But when I called the hotel and asked to be connected to Melissa Galloway's room, they told me no one by that name was registered. I tried Trent Wallace. Same result. Interesting. On Friday evening, I followed Melissa to the airport. She parked in long-term parking and walked into the terminal with her weekend bag slung over her shoulder. I watched her through the glass doors as she approached the departure screens, then walked toward the security checkpoint. But instead of getting in line for security, she took a sharp left and headed for the exit on the opposite side of the terminal, the exit that led to the rental car center. I drove around to the rental car area and waited. 20 minutes later, Melissa emerged from the Hertz office with keys in her hand. She walked over to a blue Nissan Altima, threw her bag in the trunk, and drove out of the airport. I followed her at a distance as she took Highway 41 south toward Milwaukee, then west toward Madison. But she didn't stop in Madison. She kept driving, deeper into Wisconsin's lake country, until she reached a small resort town called Lake Geneva. The Grand Geneva Resort and Spa was the kind of place where wealthy people went to pretend they were roughing it in the wilderness. Rustic luxury, they called it. Log cabin architecture with marble bathrooms and room service. I watched from the parking lot as Melissa checked in at the front desk. A few minutes later, Trent's new Tesla pulled up to the valet stand. He handed his keys to a young man in a red jacket and walked into the lobby like he owned the place. They were spending the weekend together, less than 3 hours from home, while telling everyone they were in Chicago on business. Bold. Stupid, but bold. I drove back to Frostbite and spent Saturday thinking about my options. I could confront them at the resort, cause a scene, make sure everyone knew what they were doing. I could take photos, gather evidence for a divorce attorney. I could wait until they came home and pretend I didn't know anything. Or I could do something else entirely. Sunday afternoon, I was working in my garage when Sandy Morrison knocked on my door. Sandy was Melissa's best friend, the woman who'd been providing alibis for my wife's affair. She was also the most successful real estate agent in Frostbite, which meant she knew everyone's business and wasn't shy about sharing it. "Hi, Jack, is Mel around?" "She's in Chicago. Work conference." Sandy's perfectly plucked eyebrows rose slightly. "Chicago? I thought she said Milwaukee." "Maybe it was Milwaukee. I get confused with all her business trips." Sandy stepped into the garage, her high heels clicking on the concrete floor. She was dressed for Sunday brunch at the country club, all pastels and pearls. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something." "What's that?" "There are rumors going around town about Mel and someone from her office." I set down the carburetor I'd been cleaning and looked at her. "What kind of rumors?" "The kind that could hurt her reputation. And yours." "Are you asking me if they're true?" "I'm telling you that people are talking. Mrs. Henderson saw Mel having lunch with some man at Chez Laurent. Very cozy, she said. And Tom Bradley mentioned that you seemed upset about something lately." I almost laughed. Sandy was trying to manage the situation, control the narrative before it got out of hand. She was probably worried that if the affair became public knowledge, she'd be implicated as an accomplice. "People always talk in a town this size," I said, "usually about things that aren't any of their business." "True, but sometimes the talk can take on a life of its own. Hurt innocent people." "Are you worried about innocent people getting hurt, Sandy?" She studied my face, looking for clues about how much I knew and what I planned to do about it. Sandy was smart, ambitious, and ruthless when it came to protecting her interests. She'd built her real estate empire by knowing exactly which secrets to keep and which ones to leverage. "I'm worried about my friend," she said finally. "Which friend would that be?" "Mel, of course." "Of course." We stared at each other for a moment, and I could see her trying to calculate the angles, figure out the best way to play this. but she was working with incomplete information which put her at a disadvantage. "If there's anything you want to talk about," she said, "anything at all, you know you can call me. I'll keep that in mind." After she left, I sat in my garage and thought about Sandy's visit. She was scared, which meant the rumors were spreading faster than she could contain them. And if Sandy was scared, then Melissa and Trent should be terrified. But they weren't. Not yet. That was about to change. Monday morning, I called in sick to work and drove to the offices of the Frostbite Gazette, our local newspaper. The Gazette wasn't much, a weekly publication that mostly covered high school sports and city council meetings, but it had one thing I needed, a photographer named Dave Kowalski, Ben's nephew, who freelanced for larger papers and had a reputation for being in the right place at the right time. "I need a favor," I told Dave over coffee at Mabel's diner. "What kind of favor?" "The kind that could make you some money. Maybe get your photos picked up by the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel." Dave was 28, ambitious, and chronically broke. He lived in his uncle's basement and drove a 10-year-old Honda with more miles on it than most commercial aircraft. "I'm listening." I slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were printed copies of text messages between Melissa and Trent, hotel receipts I'd found in her purse, and a detailed timeline of their affair. "Preston and Associates is one of the biggest employers in Frostbite," I said. "They get tax breaks from the city, contracts with local businesses, grants from the State Economic Development Fund. All public money." Dave flipped through the documents, his eyes widening as he read. "This is their creative director and a senior account manager," I continued. "Having an affair, using company resources to facilitate it, lying to clients about business trips, there's your story." "How did you get all this? Does it matter?" Dave considered this. "What do you want in return?" "Nothing. I just think the taxpayers have a right to know how their money is being spent." It wasn't entirely true, but it was plausible enough. And Dave was hungry enough for a real story that he didn't ask too many questions. "I'll need to verify some of this information," he said. "Of course. Take your time. Be thorough." 3 days later, the story hit the front page of the Gazette, complete with photos Dave had taken of Melissa and Trent having lunch at Chez Laurent. The headline read, "Local ad executives caught in affair scandal." By noon, the story had been picked up by the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel and the Green Bay Press-Gazette. By evening, it was trending on social media, shared and reshared by people who loved nothing more than watching successful people fall from grace. I was at Ben's gym when Melissa called, screaming so loudly that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "How could you do this to me? How could you destroy my life like this?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "The newspaper story, the photos, you gave them everything." "Mel, I'm at the gym. I haven't seen any newspaper story." "Don't lie to me, Jack. I know it was you." "Why would I do something like that?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was smaller, less certain. Because you're angry about something." "What would I be angry about?" Another pause, longer this time. "I don't know," she said finally. "Maybe you should come home," I suggested. "We should talk about this in person." "I can't come home. There are reporters outside the office. My boss wants to see me first thing tomorrow morning. I think I'm going to be fired." "I'm sorry to hear that." Are you? Are you really?" I thought about the question. Was I sorry that my wife's career was in ruins? That her affair had been exposed to the entire town? That she was finally facing consequences for her choices? "I'm sorry that it came to this," I said, which was true enough. The line went dead. That evening, I sat in my living room and watched the local news coverage of the scandal. The reporters stood outside Preston and Associates, explaining how the affair had come to light and what it might mean for the agency's reputation. They interviewed several local business owners who expressed disappointment and concern about working with a company that couldn't manage its own internal affairs. The reporter also mentioned that both Melissa Galloway and Trent Wallace had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. My phone rang constantly throughout the evening. Friends, neighbors, acquaintances, everyone wanted to know if I'd heard about the story, if I was okay, if there was anything they could do to help. I played the role of the shocked, betrayed husband perfectly, accepting their sympathy and support while maintaining my dignity. Only Ben saw through the act. "You did this," he said when he called around 10 o'clock. "Did what?" "Don't BS me, Jack. I've known you for 25 years. You orchestrated this whole thing. I didn't deny it. There was no point. Ben knew me too well. She had it coming, I said. Maybe. But what happens now? Now she comes home and we figure out what's left of our marriage. And if there's nothing left, then we end it, clean and simple. But even as I said it, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Nothing ever was. Melissa came home the next evening looking like she'd aged 5 years in 5 days. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying, and her usual confident posture had collapsed into something small and defeated. She found me in the kitchen, making dinner for one. "We need to talk," she said. "Okay." She sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of meals over the years, and folded her hands in front of her like a child waiting to be scolded. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what?" "You know what? I need to hear you say it." She took a shaky breath. "I'm sorry for having an affair. I'm sorry for lying to you. I'm sorry for hurting you." "How long?" 6 months. "Why?" She was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. When she finally looked up, her eyes were full of tears. "I don't know. I was lonely, I guess. We'd grown apart, stopped talking, stopped connecting. And Trent was there, and he made me feel attractive and interesting and alive again. So this is my fault? No, that's not what I meant. It's my fault. My choice. My mistake." "Mistake?" "Yes." "Which part was the mistake? Sleeping with him or getting caught?" She flinched like I'd slapped her. "All of it. The whole thing was a mistake." I sat down across from her, studying her face. She looked genuinely remorseful, genuinely sorry for what she'd done. But I wondered if she was sorry for betraying me, or just sorry for the consequences. "What do you want, Mel?" "I want to fix this. I want to save our marriage. I want us to go to counseling and work through this and find our way back to each other. And Trent? It's over, completely over. I'll never see him again." "That might be difficult, considering you work together." "I don't work there anymore. I was fired this morning." I felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy. Melissa had worked at Preston and Associates for 15 years, building her career from nothing into something she was genuinely proud of. Now it was gone, destroyed by her own choices. "I'm sorry," I said. "Are you?" It was the same question she'd asked me on the phone, and I gave her the same answer. "I'm sorry it came to this." We talked for 2 more hours, circling around the same themes of betrayal and forgiveness, love and trust, past and future. Melissa cried. I didn't. She begged for another chance. I listened without committing to anything. Finally, exhausted by the weight of our conversation, we went to bed. In the same bed, but as far apart as 2 people could be while sharing the same mattress. I lay awake most of the night staring at the ceiling and thinking about what came next. Melissa wanted forgiveness, wanted to rebuild our marriage on the ashes of her betrayal. Part of me, a small, stubborn part that remembered why I'd fallen in love with her in the first place, wanted that too. But a larger part of me, the part that had been growing colder and harder over the past few weeks, wanted something else entirely. Justice. 2 weeks after the newspaper story broke, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being the victim, done playing the role of the wounded husband seeking reconciliation. It was time for the final act. Melissa had been trying to rebuild our relationship with the desperate intensity of someone who finally understood what she'd lost. She cooked elaborate dinners, planned romantic evenings, and talked constantly about couples therapy and fresh starts. She'd even started looking for a new job, though her reputation in the local advertising community was essentially destroyed. But every gesture felt hollow. Every word felt calculated. She wasn't trying to save our marriage. She was trying to save herself from the consequences of her choices. Trent, meanwhile, had disappeared from Frostbite entirely. Word around town was that he'd been fired from Preston and Associates and had moved back to Milwaukee, where his ex-wife and children lived. His condo was up for sale, and his red Tesla had been repossessed by the bank. The affair that had once seemed so exciting and dangerous had cost both of them everything. But I wasn't finished yet. On a cold Thursday morning in March, I drove to Milwaukee and found Trent working at a small marketing firm in a strip mall on the outskirts of the city. It was a significant step down from his previous position. No corner office, no company car, no expense account lunches. I waited in the parking lot until he came out for lunch, then approached him as he walked to his beat-up Honda Civic, another significant downgrade from his previous ride. "Hello, Trent." He spun around, his face going pale when he recognized me. "What are you doing here?" "We have unfinished business." "No, we don't. It's over. Mel and I are done. I lost my job. I lost everything. What more do you want?" I studied his face, noting the dark circles under his eyes, the cheap suit that didn't fit properly, the general air of defeat that surrounded him like a cloud. "I want you to understand something," I said. "What happened to you? The newspaper story, losing your job, losing your reputation, that wasn't revenge. That was just the beginning. What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about consequences, Trent. Real consequences. You thought you could take my wife, destroy my marriage, and walk away without paying a price. But actions have consequences, and yours are just getting started." He looked around the parking lot, probably hoping someone would witness our conversation, but it was just the two of us, alone among the cars. "I don't know what you think you're going to accomplish," he said, trying to sound braver than he looked. "But if you're planning to hurt me, you should know that I've already told people about your threats." "I'm not going to hurt you, Trent. I don't need to. You're going to hurt yourself." "What's that supposed to mean?" I smiled, the same cold smile I'd been practicing in the mirror for weeks. "It means that every job you apply for, every reference check, every background investigation is going to turn up that newspaper story. It means that every woman you try to date is going to Google your name and find out what kind of man you really are. It means that your children, when they're old enough to understand, are going to read about their father's affair and wonder what kind of person raised them." His face crumpled slightly, and I could see the full weight of his situation beginning to sink in. "You destroyed my marriage," I continued. "Now I'm going to watch your life fall apart piece by piece, and there's nothing you can do to stop it, because unlike what you did to me, what I'm doing to you is perfectly legal." I turned to walk away, then paused and looked back at him. "Oh, and Trent, if you ever contact my wife again, if you ever come back to Frostbite, if you ever do anything to interfere with my life, I will make your current situation look like a vacation. Are we clear?" He nodded, unable to speak. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months. One problem solved. One more to go. That evening, I found Melissa in our bedroom, packing a suitcase. "Going somewhere?" I asked. "I got a job offer," she said without looking at me. "In Minneapolis. It's not much, but it's a start." "Congratulations." "I want you to come with me, Jack. We could start over somewhere new where people don't know about what happened." I sat down on the bed and watched her fold clothes with mechanical precision. "Is that what you want? To start over?" "Yes, more than anything. What about our house? Our life here? We can sell the house. As for our life here..." She gestured vaguely toward the window, toward the town that had become a prison of whispers and sideways glances. "What life? Everyone knows what I did. I can't go to the grocery store without people staring at me. I can't have coffee with friends because I don't have any friends left. You have Sandy." Melissa's laugh was bitter. "Sandy hasn't returned my calls in 2 weeks. Turns out she's very concerned about her reputation." I wasn't surprised. Sandy Morrison was nothing, if not practical. And being associated with a scandal like this could hurt her real estate business. "So, you want to run away? I want to save our marriage." "By running away, by going somewhere we can heal." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the lake that had been frozen solid for weeks. Spring was coming, though. Soon, the ice would crack and melt and the water would be free again. "I'm not going to Minneapolis, Mel." "Why not?" "Because this is my home. My business is here. My friends are here. My life is here. I'm not going to let your mistakes drive me away from everything I've built." She stopped packing and turned to face me. "Then what are we going to do?" "We're going to get divorced." The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence. Melissa sank down onto the bed, her face crumbling. "Please don't do this, Jack. Please. I know I made a terrible mistake, but we can fix this. We can make it work." "No, we can't." "Why not?" I turned away from the window and looked at her. Really looked at her. She was still beautiful, still the woman I'd fallen in love with 23 years ago. But something fundamental had changed between us. Something that couldn't be repaired with counseling or fresh starts or new cities. "Because I don't love you anymore," I said. The truth of it hit me as I spoke the words. Somewhere in the process of discovering her betrayal, documenting her lies, and orchestrating her downfall, my love for Melissa had died. Not gradually, not painfully, but completely and finally. She started crying then, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. I watched her fall apart and felt nothing but a cold satisfaction. This was what justice looked like. This was what consequences meant. "I'm sorry," she whispered through her tears. "I'm so sorry." "I know you are. Can't you forgive me?" "I already have." "Then why?" "Because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending it never happened. It doesn't mean giving you another chance to destroy what's left of my life." I walked to the closet and pulled out my own suitcase. "I'm going to stay at Ben's place for a few days while you finish packing. My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce proceedings." "Jack, please." "It's over, Mel. We're over." I packed quickly and efficiently, taking only what I needed for a few days. As I was about to leave, Melissa grabbed my arm. "What about Erin? What are we going to tell her?" "Our daughter." In all of this, I'd almost forgotten about Erin, away at college, oblivious to the destruction of her parents' marriage. "We'll tell her the truth," I said. "That sometimes people grow apart, make mistakes, and can't find their way back to each other." "She'll hate me." "Maybe, but that's not my problem anymore." I left her there, crying on our bed, and drove to Ben's gym. He was closing up for the night when I arrived with my suitcase. "It's done," he asked. "It's done. How do you feel?" I thought about the question. How did I feel? Not happy exactly, but not sad either. Satisfied, maybe. Complete. "Free," I said finally. Ben nodded and helped me carry my bag upstairs to the small apartment above the gym where he lived. It wasn't much, a bedroom, a bathroom, a kitchenette, but it was clean and quiet and mine for as long as I needed it. That night, I lay in an unfamiliar bed and listened to the sounds of a town settling into sleep. Somewhere across town, Melissa was probably still crying, still packing, still trying to figure out how her life had fallen apart so completely. And somewhere else, maybe Milwaukee, maybe farther away, Trent Wallace was probably lying awake too, wondering how a simple affair had cost him everything he'd worked for. But I slept peacefully for the first time in months, dreaming of spring and melting ice and new beginnings. # epilogue. The thaw. 6 months later, on a warm September morning, I stood in the parking lot of Galloway Auto Repair and watched a crew install my new sign. The old one had simply read Auto Repair. The new one was bigger, brighter, and more specific. Galloway's Honest Auto. Fair prices, quality work, no bees. Business had been good since the divorce. Better than good, actually. Word had gotten around town about what had happened to my marriage, and people seemed to respect the way I'd handled it. No violence, no public scenes, no bitter custody battles. Just quiet, methodical justice. The divorce had been finalized in July. Melissa kept her retirement account and her car. I kept the house, the business, and most of our other assets. She'd moved to Minneapolis as planned, taking a job at a small marketing firm for about half of what she'd been making in Frostbite. Erin had taken the news better than expected. She was angry at her mother, disappointed in both of us, but ultimately understanding. She'd spent the summer with me, working part-time at the shop and helping me renovate the house. We'd grown closer than we'd been in years. Trent Wallace had disappeared entirely. The last I'd heard, he was working at a car dealership in Milwaukee, selling used cars for commission. His ex-wife had filed for full custody of their children, citing his moral turpitude and financial instability. She'd probably get it. Sandy Morrison had tried to rebuild her friendship with Melissa after the dust settled, but it was too late. Melissa had learned the hard way that fair-weather friends disappear when the weather turns bad. Sandy's real estate business, meanwhile, was thriving. She'd recently been elected to the city council on a platform of family values and fiscal responsibility. I'd started dating again, tentatively at first, then with more confidence. There was a woman named Carol who worked at the bank, a widow with grown children, and a laugh that reminded me what it felt like to be genuinely happy. We were taking things slow, but I was optimistic about the future. The crew finished installing the sign and packed up their equipment. I stood there admiring their work when Ben pulled up in his old pickup truck. "Looks good," he said, climbing out and joining me on the sidewalk. "Thanks. I think it sends the right message." "Which is?" "That I'm exactly who I say I am." Ben chuckled. "And who's that?" I thought about the question. 6 months ago, I would have said I was a mechanic, a husband, a father, a man who fixed things and tried to do right by the people in his life. But those definitions felt incomplete now, insufficient to describe who I'd become. "I'm someone who keeps his promises," I said finally. "Someone who pays his debts and expects others to pay theirs. Someone who believes in consequences. Sounds lonely. Sometimes, but it's honest. We stood there for a while, watching the traffic on Main Street, listening to the sounds of a small town going about its business. Frostbite was changing slowly but surely. New businesses were opening. Young families were moving in. And the lake that had been frozen solid last winter was now sparkling in the autumn sunshine. "Any regrets?" Ben asked. I considered the question seriously. Did I regret the end of my marriage? The destruction of Melissa's career? The public humiliation of a man who'd thought he could take what wasn't his? No, I said. No regrets. Even about Melissa? Especially about Melissa. That evening, I sat on my back porch with a beer and watched the sun set over Lake Winnebago. The house felt different now. Smaller, quieter, but also more peaceful. I'd removed most of the family photos and redecorated in a style that was purely my own. Comfortable furniture, simple colors, no pretense or artifice. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, I wondered if it might be Melissa, reaching out from her new life in Minneapolis. But it was Carol, asking if I wanted to have dinner tomorrow night. I texted back, "Yes, looking forward to it." And I was. For the first time in years, I was genuinely looking forward to something. Not just dinner with Carol, but the future in general. The possibilities that lay ahead, the choices that were mine to make, the life that was mine to live. I finished my beer and went inside, locking the door behind me. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that I was exactly who I said I was. But tonight I was content to sit in my own house, in my own town, surrounded by the life I'd built and protected and earned. The lake had thawed months ago, but I was just beginning to feel the ice around my heart start to crack and melt. And for the first time since that cold February night when I discovered Melissa's betrayal, I felt something that might have been hope. Spring was coming again, and this time, I'd be ready for it.